2026 brings 10 titles with enough ambition to rewrite what you expect from a console generation. We aren't just looking at bigger sequels with shinier graphics. Instead, these releases challenge established genres and push every competing studio to respond differently. Some took years of waiting, others dropped with almost no warning. The lineup covers horror, fantasy, racing, spy action, gothic adventure, and the most anticipated open-world drop in the medium's history. But here is the catch. Each entry brings something developers have not fully explored before. We start with a sequel built specifically to silence the skeptics. Lords of the Fallen 2 arrives as the direct answer to every criticism players raised about the 2023 release. The developers at Hexworks studied the weaknesses of that first attempt. Then, they built something far more confident in response. They tightened the combat so that each fight rewards patience over raw aggression. Boss encounters stretch across locations designed to feel deeply menacing, and the world design pushes into darker territory than most studios would attempt on a follow-up. Each area connects to the next through environmental storytelling that keeps you questioning every corner you turn. Hexworks took its biggest swings here. The results show a team that understood exactly where their past work fell short. The Blood of Dawnwalker introduces a gothic open world built around vampire mythology, and it earns your attention within the first hour. The studio behind it, Rebel Wolves, is relatively new to the scene, but the level of detail they brought to this project puts it alongside releases from much larger teams. Sword combat flows at a pace that feels deliberate without ever turning sluggish, and that is exactly why the world carries an atmospheric tension that most games struggle to maintain beyond the early hours. What separates this one is how that dark, unsettling quality stays consistent across the whole map. Anyone seeking morally complicated stories and gothic settings will find one of the year's most interesting arrivals right here. Xbox fans spent years waiting to hear the name Fable again. Developed by Playground Games, this beloved fantasy series returns with modern technology pushing every visual and mechanical detail far beyond what previous iterations could manage. The tone stays true to what made the classic games connect with players, mixing humor and undeniable charm through every quest. Meanwhile, the world responds to the choices you make along the way. That reactive storytelling sets it apart from most other role-playing games releasing this year, because the environment shifts based on your decisions rather than simply tracking them on a stat sheet. Fans of the classic franchise will find that this return carries serious weight behind every promise it makes. Capcom delivers Pragmata as a fresh intellectual property with no legacy name and no built-in audience. Yet it manages to stand on its own without any of that support. The game blends third-person shooting with puzzle mechanics and hacking sequences that evolve as you progress. Difficulty adjusts to how well you actually perform. Set in a futuristic environment full of hostile machines and layered mysteries, it makes a strong case that fresh ideas still have a place alongside major franchises. Capcom took a substantial risk. Early hands-on sessions from players who accessed preview builds confirmed the studio crafted something well worth the wait. Control. Resonant steps up as the follow-up to Remedy Entertainment's acclaimed 2019 hit. Remedy's breakout release built a devoted following around its physics-driven combat and deeply atmospheric setting. That success placed enormous pressure on this sequel. Remedy responded by expanding the melee system and making close-range combat feel far more physical than before, giving you the sense that every fight carries real consequence. This time, you play as Dylan. Fans will recognize him from the previous game's main campaign, now navigating a version of New York where something has gone catastrophically wrong at a scientific level. Environmental storytelling reaches further here than in the previous adventure. The physics-based action produces moments that completely sit apart from anything else in this year's lineup. Playground Games pushed their flagship racing series to a new standard with Forza Horizon 6, releasing in May 2026. The open-world map covers more ground with greater variety in terrain, weather systems, and road types than any earlier entry managed, and over 550 cars populate the roster at launch. The driving physics find a balance between accessible and satisfying. That sweet spot keeps both casual players and dedicated car enthusiasts engaged for vastly different reasons. Competing studios will spend years trying to close the gap on what this entry achieved in terms of scale and visual quality. For racing games specifically, Forza Horizon 6 represents the benchmark that every title releasing after it gets measured against. IO Interactive built its reputation across the Hitman series, making 007 First Light a natural transition from assassin to secret agent. This James Bond origin story traces how a skilled but unfinished operative becomes the agent the franchise eventually centered itself around. IO Interactive carries its expertise with stealth mechanics directly into this project, giving you multiple approaches to almost every mission, rather than funneling you through a single solution. The set pieces match the scale of major spy productions. What is more, the writing gives Bond emotional stakes rather than treating him as a simple vehicle for action sequences. Anyone who wants tactical freedom in a spy setting will find that this delivers more thoroughly than anything the genre produced in the last decade. Marvel's Wolverine carries huge expectations that trace directly back to what Insomniac Games built across their Spider-Man titles. Where those games leaned into acrobatic movement and web-slinging momentum, Wolverine operates on raw aggression and close-range brutality. The character's healing factor feeds directly into how fights progress. Because of this, absorbing damage and pushing through it becomes part of the actual strategy rather than something to avoid. Insomniac spent years developing the emotional story alongside the combat systems. Early footage shows a version of the character who carries real emotional weight beyond the action. If the studio applies the same care here that produced their strongest Spider-Man work, this sits comfortably among the most important releases 2026 delivers. Resident Evil Requiem released in February 2026 and immediately positioned itself as the strongest entry Capcom produced across the franchise's 30-year history. The game brings back Leon Kennedy alongside a new character named Grace Ashcroft, and their dynamic drives both the horror sequences and the action forward in a way that feels earned rather than convenient. Capcom structured this as the closing chapter of the earliest storyline, adding a weight to every encounter that longtime fans of the series carry through the full experience. The horror design reaches levels of dread that the recent entries built toward without quite achieving. Multiple publications named it a strong Game of the Year candidate within weeks of launch, a verdict that holds up on repeated playthroughs. Grand Theft Auto 6 operates on a scale that nothing else on this list comes close to matching. Rockstar Games set November 19, 2026 as the launch date for PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X and S, ending years of buildup that began when the first trailer crossed 90 million views in its opening 24 hours back in December 2023. Returning to Vice City, players take control of two main characters, including Lucia, the franchise's first playable female lead. The open world operates at a level of detail that positions it beyond anything the genre previously achieved. Every competing studio watches this launch closely, because the standard it sets will define open world design for years to come. This lineup marks a hard reset for industry standards. The catalog runs from gothic vampire adventures and fantasy worlds, through spy operations, horror masterpieces, and the most discussed open world release in gaming history. Drop your pick in the comments below, and subscribe if you want coverage of every major release as the rest of the year unfolds. The second half of 2026 still has more surprises ahead, and the conversation is only getting started.